In your article, you propose an adjudication mechanism that solves many of the problems that many people would throw up their hands at, right? If you're going to, we've got a basic decorum versus content distinction, right? We're going to enforce some rules of decorum because the harm of doing so is very, very small. But somebody's going to have to decide whether a given violation is decorum or content. And then within content, we're going to have adjudication of whether or not something like the case that I've just presented is within the scope of tolerated behavior on Twitter or outside of the bounds, right? So how are you going to do that? Are you going to have some gigantic structure, a Baroque court system inside of Twitter? How could it be paid for? How do you keep it from being abused in the way that our court systems in the outside world are frequently abused? So anyway, do you want to describe the structure that you propose?
Yes. Yeah, that's great, because I do think this is important, because anything has to be able to scale at a reasonable price, right? And so what I propose is, first, whatever the rules are on a platform, they need to be laid out very much like the criminal law, which is with sections, numbered sections, and numbered paragraphs. 12.4.3, right? That's the crime of picking a pocket, let's say. And the bottom level, the leaf on these trees, should be no more than 100 words, and it should be written in plain English. That's the starting point. If the law is not comprehensible, you can't hold people accountable for obeying it. Second, any moderation action of any sort, including warnings, must specify the exact post in question and must quote the exact section that you are in violation of. And it is true that may have to be done algorithmically at times. However, those algorithms will fail at a pretty high rate. And so all algorithmic moderation must be appealable to a human within 24 hours. And then that's the first level of appeal. And then the second level appeal, I think, is the one that is really necessary for producing the healthy ecosystem. And it's something I came up with, and I'm pretty proud of it, actually, which is, if you've been rejected by your human right of appeal against the algorithm, you can take your case to arbitration with third party, American Arbitration Association certified arbitrators. And I've used them before in a business at scale around domain squatting of all obscure shit, where we basically had a relationship with an army of arbitrators, and they arbitrated the cases, and it worked. They're not perfect, but they're way better than an internal bureaucracy with all of its self-serving tendencies. And so this is what would happen. I'm not happy with my human appeal from the $13 an hour staffer at Twitter. So I say, I'm going to arbitration, and here's how arbitration works. You put up $100 or more.
The ostensible violator.
Me, the violator, put up $100 minimum or more, and I appeal. And the arbitration is what's called baseball arbitration in the art of arbitration, which is the arbitrator may not split the baby. They must decide either A or B. Either the tweet or comment violates that 100-word or less statute, or it does not, A or B. It has to be brisk. And arbitrators know how to do this. A fair amount of arbitration is structured as baseball arbitration. And now here's the two clever parts. If you find for the platform, the appellant, the user, loses their stake, let's say they're $100. And that $100, if it's only $100, goes to pay for the arbitrator. On the other hand, if the platform loses and the baseball arbitration is found for the complainer, the user, they get 10x the money from the platform. So I put up $100, and if the arbitrator finds in my favor, I get $1,000 from Twitter. And now a step further. Because for many people, $100 is really too much, and further, $1,000 is not enough of a penalty for really bad behavior. So I provided in this plan for stakes to be as large as $1 million, right? And so worst case, platforms paying 10 million when they're wrong. And further, very important, that there's a marketplace, the ability for anybody who think they've been done wrong by the platform to post their appeal and syndicate it, meaning that a community of, frankly, some of them just going to be sharky financial dudes, right? They're going to look at the tweet, they're going to look at the mandated 100-word statute, and they're going to say, that doesn't apply. Fuck, I'm going to back this bet, right? And if they back the bet, the backers will get 80% of the win in the case that the appealer prevails, and the appealer gets 20%. So he has an upside if he can get his appeal syndicated. Let's say he gets $10,000 worth of backers, and he wins, gets paid out $100,000. He, the appellant, gets $20,000 for not doing anything except appealing an injustice. And so the net emergent result is that anybody can get justice. The justice is self-liquidating in terms of its cost. The deciders are independent and professional deciders who are not under the thumb of Twitter. And the American Arbitration Association does a great job of protecting their arbitrators from any kind of recourse from either side in the operation. And because of the 10-to-1 leverage, the platforms will lose their ass if they're not right 90% of the time. And so I look at this combination of force fields, which this proposal creates, and I just feel really good about this, that people will now feel that moderation is transparent, as we know the rules. We can read them. They're in plain English. When they claim we violated the rules, not one, you have violated our terms of service. I mean, that's what most of these things are. These you violated terms of service. You go to Facebook's terms of service, 64 pages of gobbledygook, right? But if they have to quote the exact 100 words, which correspond to this exact post, then you can understand what you allegedly did wrong. You can make the decision whether you feel like you have been done an injustice. And if you have been, you can appeal. You can make some money off it and make them pay. And we all know one of the human senses of justice is to inflict a penalty on people who do you harm, right? So one of the things that keeps coming up in the research on deep human nature, that punishing evildoers is something that humans actually like to do, even above and beyond the rewards that might come from it. So that's my proposal, which I think if you implemented it on something like Twitter, would revolutionize both people's attitudes about moderation and the actual goodness of the result.
All right, so let me give you a couple observations on this. One, doesn't have to be professional arbiters. It could be. I like your structure. I think it would be useful. But you could also source this work from inside the community in various ways. Also, doesn't have to be individuals. You know, it could be that certain cases are important enough that you would want to have more eyes and a debate process inside the adjudication. The structure as you propose it, and I know you're going to agree with this, I'll be surprised if you don't. Let's put it that way. I mean, I will be surprised if you disagree. Is the structure as you've laid it out is a great prototype. Were you to implement it, you would almost certainly discover that the parameters are set incorrectly, right? That you could get away, that either the process is too likely to bar certain kinds of people from getting important things adjudicated because they don't have the $100 or aren't likely to risk it, and their case isn't likely to garner the attention of somebody who's waiting for a particularly golden version, or who knows. But the point is, the parameters as laid out are likely not to be right. They're a good first guess, but we don't know what the right parameters are until you've run it. So what you want is a system in which that can evolve, and the fine-tuning of this system so it works maximally efficiently, covers the maximum number of cases, and does so reasonably well, comes out in the wash. I also believe that there needs to be a feedback between this process and I did argue on Twitter this morning, that there needs to be a Bill of Rights, right? Now, the Bill of Rights should spell out what the intent of the various provisions are. And so as the system of adjudication that you've laid out gets refined, it will also reveal ambiguities in the terms of service and the Bill of Rights for users. And so that feedback can be used to refine those things so that any ambiguities get wrung out of the system, so that the unspotted problems get introduced in some formal way, and then the parameters around them get refined. And this must all be done transparently so that people can discuss the process. They can discuss the moral hazards that may arise, et cetera, et cetera. So those interacting feedbacks can both refine the adjudication and the structure of the effective laws that are being laws or standards that are being adjudicated.
Yep, I like quite a bit of this. I'll go through the parts I like, and then the one part that I considered what you proposed and rejected it.
Okay.
First, I love the idea of a Bill of Rights, right? In the same sense that the founding fathers forgot to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution, the Madisonians, Jeffersonians demanded it, and they got it. So I think that's a wonderful idea, and that should be one of the bases on which you appeal, which is, not only did I not violate Rule 12.3.4, but 12.3.4 violates the Seventh Amendment of Twitter. And either of those would be grounds for the arbitrator to find against it. And of course, Twitter pays out $10,000 to somebody because an arbitrator found a rule was unconstitutional. They're going to change that rule damn quick. Otherwise, people are going to mine the shit out of that, right? So that's I think a very good idea. Of course, you're correct. I mean, of course you're correct. The parameters that I propose are not the correct ones. They're the ones I made up when I wrote the essay, right?
They're a good first guess.
Yeah, they're not terrible, but of course they're going to change, right? It'll turn out probably that $1 million is too high. Maybe the cap should be $10,000, something like that. Hard to see how you get professional arbitration for much less than $100 on a consistent basis. Maybe you get to 50, but at scale. But if you're going to use a professional arbitration, you're going to have the minimum of 100. And now I am sympathetic to the issue about, let's say about the kid in Nigeria who makes, $5 a day. He can't come up with $100. But that's where I perhaps have more confidence in rapacious investors, right? That if there are, if there is money to be made, especially the cap is $10,000, and you can find a kid in Nigeria who has done injustice by who's posted his claim, there will be sharks. They'll be looking for those things. This is injustice. I'm putting the whole 10 grand down. I'm going to win $80,000 if I'm right. And I believe that in fact, all I have to be right is 12% of the time, right? I guess I'm enough of a market purist in some sense that I have more confidence that a marketplace in syndicated appeals will actually work pretty good.
All right. I dig it, but then we got to go one more step.
Well, before we do that, we'll come back to it. Let me finish up on the one part that I considered and rejected. You didn't quite say it explicitly, but you alluded to it, which is maybe there's other ways to adjudicate these cases than a third-party arbitration. And one that I used to love, and I used to actually propose this, is automatically selected juries of users for this sort of thing. And I actually, as I started to write the article, I actually wrote that in. Then I stopped and thought about it a minute. What would happen if you did that? And I realized there's a flaw in it, unfortunately, because it's a great idea. And for years, I've advocated it. And here's the flaw that I saw. Unfortunately, societies today are highly, highly tribalized, knee-jerk tribalism. So if you let's say, and this was going to be my proposal, that a decorum, particularly decorum violations would go that were low stakes. So the worst that could happen to you was the content was taken down, or maybe a 3-day suspension. So anything relatively low stakes would go to a randomly selected of currently active users of 10 of them, and to make the same call as the arbitrator. And if somebody who was picked didn't make the call, the algorithm would keep sending it to people until 10 of them had voted. And if 8 voted against you, you lost, right? Now, unfortunately, humans being the way they are, especially today, suppose I, say Donald Trump is a motherfucker, right? And it's against the rules to say motherfucker. People who hate Donald Trump are going to say that's not a violation. right? And so motivated reasoning would triumph over careful application of the rules. And therefore, I rejected my own idea as I was writing the article.
Well, I reject your rejection of your own idea, Jim.
Let's hear it.
Let's see if I can't resurrect it.
Okay, let's do it.
All right.
That was what you were alluding to, was my guess.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. Well, here's the thing. I think it's such a good idea that I don't want the tribalism objection to kill it, but I totally recognize your point, is that basically if all you're doing is subjecting a particular question to the arbitrary process of how many people, of whether you picked one person from this side or that side of the puzzle. But here's the thing. I do hope, and I think it is imperative, that Musk makes transparent whatever algorithmic stuff is affecting who we interact with and how we view them and all of that. But it is also true that the algorithms are in a position to figure out who is not subject to those tribal dynamics. In other words, I don't know what the algorithm thinks about you, and I don't know what it thinks about me, but I bet it's confused. All right?
I would say, most likely.
It would have to be, because the point is you get into a level of a la carte evaluations of things, and beyond some level, everybody's one off. And yeah, big data can overcome some of that. But anyway, my point is the algorithms are in a position, or at least the data matrix is in a position, to identify people who are in a good position to adjudicate these things. People who, have a consistent history of nuance in some area that makes their position somewhat unpredictable from a machine perspective, could be found. And so it could even become a badge of honor. In other words, to be spotted as somebody who's capable of adjudicating these things could be an indication that you're actually a nuanced, independent thinker, and that could be a badge of honor, which would then incentivize people to get off their tribal shit, which would be good for society. So anyway, somewhere in that neighborhood might be a solution to the hazard you rightly point out is a sizable one.
Interesting. That's and here's a way to tell if you're right. And a company the size of Twitter with Elon Musk's billions could do this, which is at some substantial scale, big enough that it was statistically significant, do both in parallel.
Yep.
In other words, and if the
A/B test it.
A/B test it, have the arbitrators do it, we can have pretty high reliability that arbitrators are good. There's a lot of literature on that. They're not perfect, but they're good. And if it turns out that finding these untriggered people, these people who are not tribal in their decisions or have the intellectual fortitude to override their tribalism, and I do know people like that, that my mother was a famously fair person. I would put my life on the line if my mother was on a jury. She was somehow able to get her tribal alliances, which were quite strong, and put them aside when she was making a judgment, right? But how you find that with a computer algorithm, I don't know. But we could test it, right? Okay. Bret and his gang of renown create or evolve, most likely from machine learning, a proposed mechanism, and then we run it in parallel with the arbitrators. And if it doesn't beat the arbitrators, we don't adopt it. When it can consistently equal the arbitrators, then maybe we'll consider adopt. We will adopt it.